All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar about how building robust data management with on logistics operation. My name is Daniel Nachum. I'm product marketing manager here at Windward. And before we dive into today's content, just a few housekeeping items. At the end of the session, I'll open for a Q&A session. So feel free to submit your questions at any time during the webinar about data, about generative AI, about logistics and supply chain, and everything there is between. Feel free. We'll try to address as many as we can. Now, I'm very happy to introduce our panel of experts. Bjorn, could you please introduce yourself? You're on mute, Bjorn.
We'll try again without the mute. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Bjorn. I am probably known to a few of you. I run a company called Nanooq Management Consultancies out of my home in Dubai. But before that, I've had a history on literally almost every side of a supply chain. I've been a carrier, been a forwarder, I've been a 3PL, I've been a consultant, and I've been a BCO for two separate large companies. Back here during Corona times, I got involved with Windward, where we did some collaborations on utilizing Windward data to try and make sense, especially of the congestion situation in North America. And I maintained that connection with Windward for quite some time because I'm excited about where Windward is taking things and how Windward is thinking about things. So much so that I've agreed to be here, not as an expert on AI, thank God we have Irit for that, but as someone who can hopefully put it into context with the background knowledge I have of what the supply chain looks like on the practitioner side.
Great, thank you. And I'm really happy that you managed to join us. Now, Irit, would you mind introducing yourself?
Of course, I'll be happy to. Thank you. So my name is Irit. I'm a data scientist and a data science team lead at Windward. I've been working on supply chain products for in research and development of Windward supply chain products for over 2 years. We worked on really interesting things: vessel ETA, Windward Maritime AI predicted ETA, sister containers, vessel schedules, exception management, and other very interesting elements in the supply chain, and including in the past few months on Gen AI applications, which is perhaps the focus of this talk and very interesting. Yeah, we're all working, trying to bring clarity and visibility and insights, management capabilities to our customers in supply chain.
Great, thank you. I'm very happy you managed to join as well. Now, before we begin, I just want to give you a quick overview about us, about Windward. Windward is an AI company that provides solutions across the maritime ecosystem. Our platform supports everything from ocean risk management and security to supply chain optimization. We've been investing in maritime-specific AI models for over 14 years. We serve over 200 customers globally, and our data is a key differentiator in providing decision-making support. A few months ago, Windward took its innovation even further by launching its first Gen AI-powered solution named My Expert. This virtual agent acts as maritime subject matter expert, understanding the complexities of the industry and its customers. My Expert delivers rapid and clear ROI by increasing productivity across the board. Now, one thing that I heard from customers and after being in conversations in trade shows, etc., is that every conversation that starts with AI or with Gen AI usually ends with data. Irit, could you please explain me why is that the case?
Yeah, I think I can. Well, when people say AI, they typically mean some smart algorithm, whether it's machine learning model or deep learning model or any type of kind of smart thing that can get you insights over the data that you have. And you know, the answer is in the, like, I mean, it could be an analysis or an insight or whatever, but the fundamental element here is the data. We have a saying in data science, I think it's also in other domains, but in data science, we have a saying, garbage in, garbage out, which I think refers exactly to that. Basically, it doesn't, so it obviously it matters which algorithm you use, but no matter how sophisticated your algorithm or your model is, if you feed it dirty data, you will get dirty results. So I think that probably relates to that. So you can start talking about AI, but essentially, first thing, you need good data.
Interesting. And you mentioned dirty data. We're going to talk about it in more details and give some examples, but could you explain to me how does the quality of the data impacts AI effectiveness in freight logistics? And Bjorn, maybe you could help that with that question as well.
Yeah, just generally, I would say that supply chain is not different than any other domain in that sense. So the data that underlies the model has to be as clean and coherent and comprehensive as possible in order to get good insights. But I'm sure Bjorn will have a lot more to say about that.
I have. I mean, it's maybe I'll elaborate on what Irit is talking about. And I suspect that there's not a single listener here who doesn't know exactly what I'm about to say, but let's just level set ourselves. The pervasiveness of unclean data and its consequences in global supply chains is absolutely massive. It's massive for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, it's a little known secret, probably also to all of you on this call, that the vast majority of world supply chains are essentially run with a piece of cutting edge technology called Microsoft Excel. And some people build some Power BI on top of that, but the data sources are disparate. They are unstructured. They are very often not standardized, as we'll see as we get further into this presentation, exactly how unstandardized data can be. And what that means is a time lag, an inability to have information at your fingertips. And even if you have the data, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can quickly make sense out of it, of them. And to make sense out of the data, you are going to be wasting in mid to large corporations. I'm going to go out on a limb and say tens of thousands of man hours per year, just on massaging bad data into hopefully slightly less bad reports, but
yeah,
still
accurate. Let's talk about it in examples of like what's bad data management effects on supply chain. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole shopping list here, and you know, I tried to, as we talk these through, I tried to put them in some kind of sequence, but there is no sequence because all of these things happen. Many of them will happen simultaneously. Very few of them will happen consecutively. But anybody here on this call, and certainly those of us here in the panel, we know that if you're operating off of dirty data or unstructured data or data with some anomalies in them and a time lag, all of these things will occur. Your operational efficiency goes out the window because your ability to take decisions quickly based on data that you know and trust to be accurate, well, that capability is not there. That means you delay your decisions. The higher costs and the risks, well, they are obvious, right? We live in a world now where it's almost white swan events that are unusual. Is right. Yeah. We used to call these things black swan events. I'm not sure. I think we're living in a world of black swans now, where white swan would be rare and also welcome. But the risk management, so long as you're doing that off disparate data sources with a time lag in Microsoft Excel, well, you know the answer to that, right? You lose your ability to react, right? Later on or earlier on in the chain comes with this data a reduced ability to forecast, and with that comes inaccurate inventory tracking and also very often overstocking. Disruptions in the supply chain, well, I mean, they spring usually from your inability to manage risks. Right, the fragmented communication channels we've already talked about, right? The data sources are disparate, they're lagging, they're error-prone. Compliance and regulatory is one that I think almost should be up there in big, bright, you know, red font size 28 letters, because that is, it's a subject I know is very near and dear to Windward's entire business model and where you came from. It's also one that should be near and dear to everybody here, right? When it just... in the last 8 months, I've been involved in 2 cases where the company I worked for very nearly got shut down. I mean, shut down in a massive geography, because we weren't able to get data, supply chain data, fast enough to regulators to prove that we were compliant with certain rules and regulations around sanctions. Okay.
Yeah.
Send them dirty data, and the result is shutdown, massive fines, potentially jail time, although that is at the extreme, but not out of the question. So compliance is huge. And I would say almost if Gen AI solved nothing other than your compliance reporting capabilities, then it would be well worth the investment. But it will, I hope we shall see, go a long way towards solving all of these on this page.
Yeah. Great. But before talking about the solution, I want you to please talk about the challenges of data, of achieving robust data in freight logistics. Would you mind telling us what we see here?
Irit or me?
You, if you can continue.
Yeah, I mean, I can start, and then hopefully it will take over. I mean, we've already touched on nearly all of it, right? When I say that data sources are disparate, it means it can come from forwarders, it can come from carriers, it can come from truckers, it can come from your brokers, it can come from your airlines, so your air freight forwarding agents, your express companies. They're all over the place. They can be dirty, and I know has several examples of what we mean by dirty data. Dirty is not as in nefarious, just as in, polluted, very difficult to understand, difficult to harmonize. The accessibility is a whole separate issue. Data generally are accessible, but they often come with a lag that prevents timely reaction. And I prefer to, maybe data lag would be a better severe challenge than accessibility. And that's one of the big problems that needs solving in order to really make this a robust solution.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think I would like to dive deep into some of the problems and give some examples. Bjorn, continuing with you, can you tell us what we see here, please?
I mean, you're seeing here 2 different carriers and the way they report certain milestones, or rather the terminology with which they report certain milestones. This is a classic, and a lot of people out there on this call will have seen this, and those who are perhaps as old as I am will have seen this for 30 plus years, 40 years, 50 years from the dawn of containerization, that, a sweet child has many names, as we say in Denmark. That there's a tribalism to terminology across carriers, across forwarders, across airlines, but some people just use different nomenclature for the same event, right? Maersk has chosen to report that their container here was gated out for delivery. That's, to me, a pretty clear term. That's probably the one I would personally prefer, because it accurately describes exactly what has happened. It's on its way to the customer, and it's out of the gate and on the way. Over here in the CMA CGM example, this is not a single out CMA CGM, because trust me, you can find similar examples across other carriers where they have their own sort of pet terminology. Container to consignee. To me, if I was looking at that, it would be very unclear to me whether that meant that the container was gated out and on its way to the consignee, or whether the container had been delivered to the consignee. There's a difference, right? And this is just one of many. When I say tribal, if there are Maersk people out there listening on the call, or people who work with Maersk, you've come across the term FFE. And you will only come across that if you work with Maersk. It means 40-foot equivalent. The one the rest of the world calls an FEU. And still in Maersk, the term FFE is more common. Does that appear very often in reporting? No, but it's just an example of this what I call this tribal language that individual carriers have developed. Irit will hopefully expand on what this means in terms of clearing up the data, because these 2 particular chains of events would have all gone into the same report.
Yeah, and why is that even a problem for you when architecturing products?
Yeah, thank you, Bjorn. I'm glad you asked because, well, for a person viewing this, a person with their common knowledge and acquired expertise in the domain, so this is only difficult and annoying. Okay, having these two terms that are so different and actually refer to the same event in the real world, right? They're referring to the same thing, but you have such different terminology, like Bjorn said. So this is only annoying, but for a software or a data pipeline, it's impossible. Like it's impossible to understand that they mean the same thing unless you standardize it in some way. So it can be your own personal standardization that suits your needs. But if you don't do that, then there's no way your system will realize that these are the same events, the same event basically in the world. And so it's not a matter of difficulty or annoyance. It will just not work unless you do that.
Port names are another excellent example. The three-letter codes for ports. I mean, most of us have long ago transitioned to using UN-low codes. But I know from experience, very, very recent experience, and on a sustained basis across carriers, many of them have their own internal three-letter codes for ports and airports, especially ports. There's more discipline in air freight, but especially ports, where you sit and you scratch your head going, what port is that? I have no idea what that port means. And you can't even look it up because it's not actually a UN-low code. There were tons and tons of examples of that. And those are also legacies, tribal legacies that date back to when UN-low codes weren't a thing for ports, right? And so people sort of made up their own because everything must have a three-letter code by some convention that I was not a part of. So it's not just this nomenclature. It's in every single data piece there can be tribal nomenclature.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's more than a headache for logistics operators. It sounds like a real problem.
Yeah.
I agree so much with Bjorn. And when I said you can standardize it to your own internal need, it is true. But of course, if you standardize it, when I say standardize, I mean kind of translate it to a standard. And if that standard is the common standard for your customers and for other players in the ecosystem, then that's great. That'll be easier to sell, easier to explain, and you will save yourself the later translation, the translation downstream. So yeah, this is a real problem. It's a real thing.
Yeah, no, thank you for your explanations. Now let's talk about another example of non-standardized data. Irit, would you like to tell us what we see here?
Yeah, of course. So what we're seeing here, we see two examples of tariffs for detention and demurrage for D&D. Which basically means, for those who maybe there are some in the crowd that don't know, that it means how much you're going to pay if you leave your container for such and such, between such and such days at the port. So this is usually for a specific port and a specific container type and other kind of specifications. But basically, it's a way to explain how much you're going to pay, how to calculate the cost. So basically, these two forms that we see here, they convey the same information. It might not be the same specific details, but they convey the same type of information, but they bring it in such different way. And that's, I think, that's what I want to highlight here. So there are two levels of difficulties here that I see. First is the wording, which is pretty similar to what we saw in the previous example, but it doesn't only go to standard events or standard low codes. So on the left, it's a little bit hard to see, but on the left it says, referring to which ports this contract, this tariff is relevant for, it says all UK ports, except T-Sport and Belfast. And on the right, we see Great Britain on one place, and then on the other place, we see all ports excluding Northern Ireland, in parentheses. So basically, they're referring to the same group of ports, but they use such different words to explain it. So again, if you're a person looking with your common knowledge, you can maybe understand that it refers to more or less the same group. But for a software to understand it, or maybe to understand and be able to take all the variable ways to present this group of ports is very difficult. So this is one kind of level of difficulty. And the other one that we can see here is kind of the structure in which the information is brought to you. So again, a little small, but on the left, we see that the way with the days where you start paying, the days after the free days are described pretty explicitly. On the left says just days 6 to 10, very clearly. And on the right, it's also clear, but very differently. It says it's like the first period will be, you have to understand when the first period starts after the free period ended, a row above. And then it will say how many days. So it's, in this example, 6 days of the first period. So again, they're referring to the same chunk of days, almost. I mean, you know, but they're referring to the same chunk of days and just presented in a different structure, in a totally different format. And that's also a difficulty for software here to understand that this would mean the same thing. So you gotta kind of have different ways of looking at it.
Yeah.
And these are only 2 examples. So
yeah,
basically every carrier here would fall into what's convenient for them, which is the logic way for them to do it, as long as there's no regulation and no standardization, etc. So
and
it can get worse than this.
Yeah.
Because in order for this webinar not to turn into a pick on carriers webinar, BCOs are equally guilty of asking very often for data and tariffs to be presented in a proprietary manner. That could look like this, it could look like the one on the left, it could look like something completely different. And these tables then make their way into contracts. I've seen egregious contracts, and not even just in ocean freight, but also in express freight. They're very, very common. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages in a contract with essentially tables like that. Tables like this have a place if you're managing in one port for one carrier, right? But as soon as you insist on building tables like this for every single carrier there is and every single port combination you ship cargo on, it's bad enough that the carriers have their own formats, you know, but the BCOs and forwarders are equally guilty of asking for stuff here. It increases, again, the amount of time you spend on finding out whether you're being charged correctly. It's the amount of time that the carrier needs to spend on figuring out what to charge. The amount of time that arises from disputes, because these kinds of tables lend themselves splendidly to human error. You know, all you got to do is let your eyes slide, you know, just a tiny little bit and you get the wrong number. This is pervasive, really, really pervasive, and very difficult to decode and standardize.
And very difficult to manage it at scale, right?
It's difficult to manage at any level. Unless, like I said, you're a very small shipper who ships something only from one port to one other port. You have 2 of those tables, one at either end. That'd be great, right? Then you can work it, but there aren't many of those.
Yeah.
So can I add something here? It's kind of, again, from the software perspective, but or from the data science perspective, but one of the challenges, I think, it relates to the challenge of scaling, that and understanding what you see, being able to understand what you see, is something that taps into kind of a principle, which I term data modeling, which means what your entity is, like what information it conveys. And I'll give an example, like from Windward, we have a basic entity, which is a vessel. And then we have other basic entities like port and port calls. And obviously, port call is some relation between a vessel and a port, right? So that's data modeling. You kind of define the relations between the entities and what an entity can do and what it can't do. In supply chain, we're adding additional kind of more supply chain entities such as shipment and BOL. And if you want to be able to understand massive amounts, or it's not even about, I mean, it helps in the massive, but it also helps to build an additional layer of information on top of the layer of information that you already have. That is data modeling, that when you, like, once you will be able, so if you were able to have a clear definition of the entities in this, in these 2 contracts, And that'll be a solid foundation for building then another insight on top of that, and another insight on top of that, like we do in Windward. But this is really like the foundations of your building, having good data modeling and being able to describe the information in a way that is both variable and suits your customer and suits whatever your BCO and suits everything, and conveys the full variability of information that lies there. Then you will be able to add additional floors on top of that foundation. And my experience is that this is a key element in any data pipeline process, because if your foundations are not good and you had a bad data modeling of any entity, of any issue, then you will not be able to build many floors. It'll just collapse. So
by the way, you'll see this type of data. If you think this is complicated, demurrage and detention, try and download 15 different carriers' schedules and see how differently they're structured.
Yeah.
Some of them I can't read, and I should know how, but I make mistakes.
the variability is huge, indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now let's look at another example, another type of a data problem, which we called dirty data. You guys mentioned it before. If we look on the right side, we see a shipment that was intended for Egypt. The carrier originally indicated that the freight was headed towards the port of El Dakhila in Egypt, but then it showed on 8 consecutive days, as we see here, that the port of destination is in Piraeus in Greece, which is almost 800 kilometers away. At the end, it did arrive to Egypt, and that was it. This is an example of their data. Bjorn, how much of a burden is that for operators, something like that, to deal with it?
This one, I got to be honest, I've never seen this one before, but that doesn't mean anything. I also don't, on a day-to-day dive that deep into it. It could have caused a huge problem. It could have not caused a problem, depending on how critical that shipment was to the BCO and how much they watched that shipment. So I'm not going to sit here and say it caused a gigantic problem, because it could have caused no problem whatsoever. But the fact that this situation exists and you've been able to find it relatively easily suggests to me that it's not that uncommon. And if this sort of stuff happens at scale, I'm sure there's an explanation for this. Can't quite work out what it might be, but I'm sure there is one. If you're able to find a lot of these, then they will at scale produce a problem for a lot of people. I could also imagine, for example, if you were trading on letters of credit and this sort of thing happened all of a sudden, that the banks would start getting twitchy saying what's going on. So there are all kinds of risks here. I have never seen this particular issue before. At least it looks like it was always meant to go via Piraeus. But why it was ever labeled as the POD and not the transshipment port is that's the weird part.
Yeah, it's a real example that our product manager sent, and we have tons of these. But Irit, I wanted to ask you, why is this? Maybe you can explain why is this happening. Maybe could you relate that to the explanation of what dirty data is?
Yeah, I'm smiling because it reminds me of a sentence that my manager told me when I started working at Windward, and she said, data is dirty. Data always comes dirty. And in a sense, it's true. I mean, you can try and find a data provider that gives you better data, yes, but you can't expect. So there is mess in the data. What we mean when we say dirty data is kind of it's not right. Something there went wrong. And I agree with Bjorn, we don't know why the carrier published this kind of zigzag in POD. Probably maybe an error on their side. I don't know. Maybe there really was a change. Maybe there wasn't a change. The fact is that once that is your data or our data provider, this is the information that we will get. There's no bypassing that. And you can't, so what you can do is take this information and be very alert to the potential data drifts or messiness that can be happen, and then try programmatically or not to take care of it. But this is like, especially when the world, and when I say world, I mean here the domain, when the domain is messy, then the messiness, the data will be messy, and you can't avoid that. So that will happen. Yeah, yeah. I think we have another example down.
Yeah, we'll explain later like how we can solve that, like with the Windward data approach. But thank you for explaining that. It is very clear. Now, I want to talk about another phenomena about dirty data, which is related to two shipments that are under the same vessel, conducted by different carriers, sometimes the same carriers with different ETAs. Bjorn, could you tell us a bit about that and what do we see here?
I mean, if it's on the same ship and you're seeing different ETAs, there can be a lot of stuff going on. There's a latency in reporting these things. Okay, there's a deep latency in the reporting of scheduled changes. This is well known. Some carriers prefer not to update the schedule, especially if it's with a delay, which it nearly always is, until they're absolutely certain that there will be a delay. There are ways to mitigate a delay. There are all kinds of things that can happen in the space of traveling from one port to the other. So it could simply be that one carrier has chosen to make the update and the other carrier has chosen not to yet make the update. That can even be seen within alliances, that alliance partners who are all shipping cargo on one of the alliance's vessels will report different ETAs. Some will put buffers in their schedules, some will not put buffers in their schedules. And it's kind of, why is that important? Well, you want to know when your stuff is going to get there. And if it's not going to get there when you were told it was going to get there, you want to know as quickly as possible, A, that it's not going to get there in time, and B, when it's going to get there then, right? Promises are made based on these ETAs. The ETA itself is an implicit promise, albeit protected by certain conventions, and an opening promise from a carrier as part of a business transaction. What carriers sometimes don't understand or don't seem to care about is that a series of promises are made on the back of that promise. We're making, as shippers, promises to our plants, to our warehouses, to our customers in case of customer direct shipments. We're making decisions on inventories. We're making decisions on premium freight. We're making decisions on call-off schedules, etc., based on that initial promise. That's the gripe that I have about it. Why you're seeing this is simply because some carriers choose to update and some choose not to update yet when something changes.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is this showcases the importance of accurate ETAs, not just on customer satisfaction, but on the customers and their customers' bottom lines and operations.
So I think it shows more the importance of that elusive, maybe not so elusive anymore, predictive ETA. It's completely understood by carriers, by forwarders, by shippers, by anybody, that carrier schedules are not accurate. It's empirically proven that carriers' vessels are on average late 60% of the time. And when they are late between 1 and 3 days. Now, the whole community has sort of baked that failure into the entire supply chain, meaning if I'm a shipper and somebody quotes me an ETA, I'm going to add 3 days to it, or at least 2. And I'm going to communicate that to my planners, who are in turn going to add more inventory because the transit time is longer. But that inventory, a lot of that sits in that gigantic floating warehouse on the sea called a container ship, and it's not free, right? We can try and persuade carriers and forwarders as well, by the way, to, how shall I put this, stop lying. But that hasn't worked for a very long time. We can add inventory, and that's what we do now, but that's expensive. There's a big potential prize for those who can come up with a truly accurate some kind of AI-based predictive ETA that hits the mark, empirically proven over a sustained period of time.
Yeah.
That's the only way we're ever going to get rid of this problem.
Yeah, and that is a great segue to our next slide. This is, by the way, this is a screenshot from Windward Ocean Freight Visibility Platform. Irit, this slide showcases Windward's maritime AI, how it can predict ETAs, unlike CARES ETAs. How are we doing that? Oh, sorry.
So yeah, so this is indeed a real problem, and I mean a real challenge, I want to say, because it's a real problem in the world. So Windward Maritime Predictive ETA is provided by a machine learning model that gets as input the carrier ETAs, but also other sources of input, such as the vessel's current location and the historical journeys of this route, etc. So these are all kind of the basic elements that are fed into the model, and then it gives a good predictive ETA. But what we see here is a really interesting thing that so on the left we see the carrier ETA, and on the right we see Windward's maritime predictive ETA. And on the left, and these are actually what we term internally sister containers. So these are all containers going to the same, they're on the same vessels, and they're headed for discharge on the same port. So naturally, they're supposed to be there at the same time, pretty much the same time. But we see on the left huge variability in the carrier ETAs that we receive for these sister containers. Huge variability, and I can tell you because this is kind of a highlight of what we see in the background, but in the background you can also see that many of these ETAs they come from the same carrier. So it's not even a matter of different carriers. It's the same provider will give different ETAs for containers that are sitting now on the same vessel and headed for the same port, which is, I can't explain why. Like Bjorn said, I have no idea. It's beyond me, but this is the data this is the input data, and this is the data of visibility that the world gets. And what Windward tries to do when we recognize this situation is just to, I mean, what we do is recognize these situations and then apply the best PTA we have to all these containers and reduce significantly, I think, the confusement and difficulty for our customers.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
I would actually like to say another thing here, which also relates to what we saw earlier about limitations of software. Because of machine learning predictive, some limitations that we have, and the fact that we are aware of them. So there are situations where it's difficult to understand. Specifically here, understanding that they are sister containers might not be difficult, but if we recall the previous example of POD change, it might be very difficult to understand for a change in POD if it's a real change that's going to last, a genuine change in plan, or if it's just like a jitter in data that we saw earlier. And that is very difficult for us to understand programmatically, at least for a while. It can be difficult to understand it. And in that case, we realize that we have a limitation. And then we turn to people. We incorporate what we term human in the loop. You want to have a person with their intelligence and experience look at the situation and judge, is this a real change or not? And that is, I think, a very important element that once data science was all about, it was just about software and machine learning and algorithms, etc. It still is, but Windward realizes the places of limitation and puts people in those places so that eventually our customers won't suffer from those limitations, and we will be able to give better results. And this is also true for this and for any other AI product that we bring. I just wanted to mention the limitations here of the very powerful predictive maritime AI or predictive any modeling that you do.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, but I think the bottom line here is that there is a solution for things like that, for anomalies in carriers, ETAs, even though it's on the same vessel, and for other things like we saw before. Here, I'm closing a full circle with the previous example. On the right side, this is the example that I showed about the shipment that was headed to Egypt, and then eventually it arrived to Egypt. So if we look here on the left rectangular, we see that the customer didn't see that his shipment is heading towards Piraeus, even though it appears it was surfaced from the carriers during 8 consecutive days, meaning that we at Windward cleaning the noise. By the way, this is Windward shareable shipment page. It's part of our ocean freight visibility platform, allowing both our customers and their stakeholders to access live shipment page status. While on the left side, if you look on the left rectangular, we see in the chart that there was actually a POD change from Long Beach. This is the symbol low code of Long Beach to Los Angeles, and the customer eventually did receive an exception alert called port of destination change for him and for his team.
Yeah, thank you. This is exactly John.
Yeah. What do you think about this, Bjorn?
Well, I think that you hopefully have solved the one on the right where the customer will in the future get that update. I suspect the one on the right, the container was always meant to be shipped in Piraeus, and it was rolled, and it spent 8 days there, and somebody's changed the code for no reason.
Yeah.
Something like this. The one on the left, it's good that the customer received the notice. This notice is not nearly as egregious because in this case, the two destinations are not 800 kilometers and an ocean apart. They're literally next to each other in San Pedro Bay. There could be 100 reasons for that switch. It could just be congestion or a change in berthing plans or whatever. Many carriers have berths in both LA and Long Beach. So what I think is, there's room for improvement there. Hopefully you've caught that in the one on the right, with the Piraeus case. But on the left, it obviously works well. And it's useful. It's very useful. Why? Because unless this was a point-to-point booking, the customer would have to arrange for a pickup of the container at the destination port. And sometimes they ask carriers to do that with their own house trucker. Sometimes they ask carriers to do that with the customer's own house trucker, and sometimes the customer arranges it on their own. And obviously at this point, whether you pick it up in LA or Long Beach port is not insignificant. So this is why it's important to get these updates.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Now, we talk about the predicaments and challenges, but now I want to start talking about the solutions, and because it is a pivotal time in history and technology. And I would like to hear from you, Irit, how Gen AI can enable us new ways to process data based on what we've discussed so far.
So yeah, in many ways, I think I agree with you. This is a real game changer in my eyes in the field. So I think it's many things combined, but the fact that Gen AI understands human language, that it has common knowledge in a sense, and even if it doesn't have the knowledge you need, it can really easily be taught. Just tell it the knowledge and it will learn it. So really easily be taught new knowledge. Plus the fact that it's insensitive to different wordings like we saw earlier and different formats like we saw earlier. This actually means that you can take unstructured data and structure it and use it the way you want it. And that means that suddenly we have so many opportunities, so many data sources that were previously unreachable for us to use now. I mean, the media and social media and articles and mails and contracts and so many sources that up until now were just too variable, too unstructured, too crazy, and we couldn't even conceive using them. You couldn't even think about using them, you know. And now they are at reach. I even think that we're only seeing, like, personally, I feel that I'm only seeing the tip of the iceberg with the potential of what we can do here. I think that my mind is not yet used to thinking of things that I'm just so used to thinking of them as I can't do that programmatically. And now with Gen AI, I think we can. So the potential here is just massive.
I agree 100%. I think garbage in, garbage out, where you want to get and where you might get one day with Gen AI as it develops and as you feed it more, is garbage in, gold out. That's the dream. I think maybe at this level, garbage in, bronze out is still a hell of a lot better than garbage in, garbage out, right? So I think it's a super exciting development, especially this ability to, as you say, understand, converse with the data, have a discussion with the data, understand human language, right? Which takes so many of the potential human errors out of the equation. You don't have to learn how every carrier describes a delivery event. The system knows how these carriers describe delivery events. Can you do that in Excel? Yes, you can. Can you do it at scale? No, you can't. And somebody's going to find a way to corrupt it, right? Because every time you make something idiot-proof, somebody invents a better idiot. Gen AI is oblivious to that. And I think this is super exciting.
Yeah. Irit, I want to go back to you, and Bjorn, maybe you can help here as well. You gave the example of the media as a legit data source for Gen AI. Can Gen AI contextualize an event that happened or will happen and generate an automatic alert for a customer? And I want to relate it to what's going on in the world right now. This is like the Black Swan era. We hear about hurricanes disrupting the activities of ports. We hear about a potential strike in multiple ports in North America. It might start on October 1st. How those mega event that happens on multiple places can bring value to a specific freight forwarder or specific BCO, small or large, that expects his cargo to arrive.
Yeah, I'll be happy to, because I really can outline kind of the steps of doing that. So for instance, a strike is something that, or a hurricane is something that we typically hear about in the media a few days before it happens. So if we have a Gen AI listening to the media and then, you know, it captures that some strike happened, and then I'm talking about the data pipeline kind of thing here, okay? Not a person that realizes that there's, I mean, I want to kind of separate between people using Gen AI and using Gen AI in data pipeline processing. So when a person listens, it might have an alert. This is something that we have for years now, Google Alerts, but you could ask Gen AI to listen to the media kind of, and then realize what's going on, and then match it with your customers and their shipments and alert them that something's going on. When you do it as in a data pipeline processing, you will need to structure what you hear from the media. So the Gen AI will you know, we need to take what the Gen AI finds and then put it in some kind of structure that we can run through our data pipeline flow and integrate it with what we have. So the steps will be, have a Gen AI listen, structure what it listens to into something that you can run through your data pipeline, and match it with all the shipments that have any, that go through that port or relevant ports around it. And then alert these people, the specific customers that have these shipments. And I should say that alerting them is just the beginning. So an alert is nice, but you can really potentially offer different solutions. They will, of course, take it to actions. So yeah, this is a very relevant and powerful, I think, use case of Gen AI.
It is. I want to caution a little bit, and you touched on it yourself. You need to also understand that you can't make your customers drink from a fire hose. If you have Gen AI that reads about every little thing that happens and pumps it onto the customers, they will really be drinking from a fire hose. And I've seen that over the last 10 years, it's become popular. There are several services out there you can subscribe to with events that might affect your supply chain. You get this newsletter, and before you know it, you have to open a whole new mailbox because now there is a roadworks on a bridge on I-95 North, and that may have an impact on these 2 containers that you have going to your plant up there, right? You really, really, really need to decide what is truly important and detrimental to your supply chain. And hurricanes, yeah, that would be one. Strikes would be another. But again, I don't know how many strikes are going on somewhere in the world right now. I'm prepared to bet it's over 100 that sometimes that will affect someone's supply chain. Where do you put the limit, right? And it needs to be very, very targeted to a customer's personal supply chain, right? I've never in my life shipped a container to or from Bangladesh in any of my jobs. I don't care how long Bangladesh is on strike. I really don't. But I care about the 200 emails I get every day about the strike in Bangladesh. If you can tailor it to people's individual supply chains and keep it to really, really significant events, I think it has value. Otherwise, what will happen is people will unsubscribe really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. I can already see that we got a bunch of questions from the audience, but before we go into read them, I just want to talk about our approach towards data and talk a little bit about Windward supply chain solution. Our platform offers multiple capabilities such as AI-based exception insights and shipment visibility, but it's important to stress out, especially after this webinar, that our cutting-edge technology is built on our robust data approach. Irit, from a technical standpoint, can you walk us through briefly, if you can, how our platform integrates these elements to provide comprehensive solution for supply chain?
Yeah, I'll try. So the first thing is to find a good data provider as much as you can. But once you have good data providers, and also usually it's not one, you would usually want some redundancy, and indeed in Windward we ask for that redundancy. It sometimes helps to overcome the lagging that Bjorn mentioned earlier, etc. But then it has its own difficulties in fusing different data sources for the same thing. But basically, we get good data. That's the first step, and then you have to build a robust pipeline around it. That means periodic intakes of the data and automatic cleaning as much as possible, standardizing it, and then transforming it into the format, into the data modeling of that will suit you downstream. So a great example for standardization is the DCSA events. So DCSA is a pretty new standard for describing events. It's a pretty complex thing. It holds around 7 fields, but slowly, I think the world is starting to use the DCSA. And in Windward, this is what we do. So we take events coming from different standards and different carriers, or different, not only carriers, and then standardize them all to DCSA events. And only DCSA events are those that flow in our system, in our data pipeline. So that would be kind of a first step. But we have also other types of information that we get, like schedules, and then we want to integrate them with kind of non-supply chain, or not necessarily supply chain entities, like I said earlier, like vessels and port calls, etc. And combine all these using good data modeling, combining all them, and then being able to integrate them and getting insights out of these very variable kind of data sources that emerge in time to specific times and places. So that is basically, we feed these types of information into models and then extract from that the maritime predictive ETA and exceptions, like we saw earlier, the POD change, and other insights. So I think what I just described is basically that building that I was talking about earlier. and you have different kind of foundations, and as long as they're solid, you can take them to the next level and have more interesting insights and less trivial insights from that. All the information that I said here, even the lower levels, the ground floors, is presented in the UI to our customers, and also accessible via API. But the interesting, I think the powerful thing is that they are fed as inputs to more complex models, and more complex models, bringing more and more non-trivial and important insights. And of course, I forgot to mention, but this is really important, that all these processes need to work in sync. This is part of the robustness of the data pipeline, and they have to have good quality monitoring all the way through. And when I say monitoring, I mean alerts of system health. It's part of the robustness of building a good data pipeline, but also validation and data quality, and also incorporating the human in the loop when necessary, and integrating their insights into the pipeline. So all of this will eventually result in a strong, sturdy building with really interesting insights.
Yeah, thank you. Before we read some of the questions that we got from the audience, I just want to say that something that I learned from the preparation for this webinar is that the gains of Gen AI are so significant that not just how, but how quickly companies implement it using their own data can determine the winners and losers in supply chain and logistics. So the best approach is to simply get started with proper safeguards, the right strategy, and of course, the right partner to do it with, such as Windward. If you're interested in learning more, please feel free to fill the lead form, to scan the QR code here, or check the lead form that is just going to be sent right now in the chat. Now, I saw some questions here from the audience, and I wanted to ask you, Irit, to what extent does it mitigate dirty data?
To what extent it mitigate what mitigates? I'm sorry. Probably referring to a specific thing I said, and I'm sorry, I can't.
No, it's okay.
I think maybe the question is it now okay that my data is dirty because Gen AI will fix it?
Oh, thank you, Bjorn.
I think.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. No. The short answer is no, it's not okay. I mean, Gen AI will get confused like anyone, and you do want to help it do a good job. You can think of Gen AI as a 15-year-old teenage, okay? And you want to talk to it reasonably. If you confuse it, it will get confused. It's no different than any other person. But it does have the ability, does have pretty good ability to overcome some things. Yeah, I mean, using the common knowledge and using the variability and understanding things. But if you really have like an issue like we saw earlier with the change in POD, I don't think that at that point of time that we saw the change, the bad change, the change that was not a real change, Gen AI would be able to fix that. At least not, I mean, perhaps, I need to think about it. But generally, no, you still need to clean your data, but you're able to give it many more sources and variable and unstructured sources, and it'll handle that very well.
Yeah. Thank you. I have just one more question from the audience, and then I'll let you guys go. If I consume the data through API, TMS, for example, which is very prevalent nowadays, how will it affect the quality of the data, assuming that I'm using a vendor, another software for my operation?
So my general feeling, and I don't know if Bjorn, if you have experience with that as well, but my general feeling is that it's a better start. Like, it's a good start to start with API because it comes structured, so you get that off your mind. It's already structured. Someone thought of the structure and gave it to you via API. it often means that it has been processed before it was given to you. So it could be a little bit cleaner. It often is a little bit cleaner and nicer. So and the structure is the main thing here. So it's much better to get it via API than, I don't know, scraping from a website, for instance. So it's pretty good.
I think that may be true in some instances, but I have seen through way too many examples of not a whole lot of cleaning having taken place before something was sent to me through API. I do want to maybe finish with one observation I've made, which is that there is a lot of fear about adoption of AI, Gen AI, into private supply chains out there. I think a lot of companies are holding back, some for all the right reasons, some for all the wrong ones, because there is a fear about, am I putting my data out there for people to inadvertently see? Am I putting my data out there and inadvertently revealing something? We had some highly publicized cases of Samsung, for example, running into that problem. I don't know, Irit, whether you can speak to how close of a loop is it if you use the Windward tools, the Windward models. You give Windward your data. Is there a risk that that data ends up somewhere else, like in the general public?
Oh, no, that wouldn't be the case in Windward, but you're bringing a very real issue with Gen AI and safety and privacy, because typically we are provided the foundation models they serve us the model, and then the default behavior is usually that they keep the information that we send to the Gen AI model. So there are usually ways to overcome that, but you need to be aware and do that, because the default will be that they will save the information. So it's a very valid point.
And your data is not being used to train a publicly available model.
No.
Which can thereby inadvertently reveal, as in the case of Samsung, stuff that really shouldn't have been revealed.
Yes, no, there's no fear for that in Windward. Data.
Yeah, as we saw in the previous slide, privacy and security is part of having robust data. It's inseparable. I think this is going to be our last note for this webinar. I want to thank you both, Irit and Bjorn, and I want to thank all of you for joining. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. My email is here. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
It's been a pleasure as always. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.